I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
Princess Anne did not hesitate. The document had barely reached the table before she understood what it would change and who would gain from it. Camilla's new proposal was being presented as a simple adjustment to royal balcony appearances, but Anne saw something far more dangerous buried beneath the ceremonial language. One signature could turn tradition into personal authority, and when the Princess Royal pushed the pages away, the room realized this was no ordinary disagreement. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne kept her eyes on the pages. The Royal Balcony Appearance Protocol, the proposed set of rules governing who appears, when they enter, and where they stand during major Buckingham Palace balcony moments, looked orderly on the surface. But the crucial paragraph changed everything. Camilla would gain greater influence over the entrance order and the placement of senior royals beside King Charles. That meant Anne, William, Catherine, and the Wales children could all be moved according to a system shaped by the Queen's judgment. Camilla watched without blinking as Anne read the passage again. She had expected questions, resistance, but not this silence. The Princess Royal closed the folder, placed both hands on the table, and said quietly that she could not support it. She did not soften the words. She did not apologize. And that restraint made the rejection feel even sharper. Charles felt the room tighten around him. He understood what his wife believed the proposal represented: recognition, certainty, and a ceremonial place after years of scrutiny. But he also knew why his sister was alarmed. Anne had spent decades serving without demanding control over others, and she saw the new clause as something larger than positioning. To her, it was a precedent one that could turn royal hierarchy into personal discretion. Camilla finally reached for the folder, but Anne stopped the moment from ending there. She asked that the protocol be formally withheld from implementation until the king personally reviewed the authority it granted. That request changed the stakes immediately. This was no longer an objection. Anne was challenging the mechanism itself, and Charles now had to decide whether the Queen's proposal deserved protection or restraint. Camilla gathered the pages slowly. Her composure held, but her voice hardened. Is this about protocol, Anne, or is this about me? The question landed with the force of years left unspoken. Anne did not answer at once. And in that silence, a dispute over several feet of balcony space became something far more dangerous. A test of who believed they had earned the right to stand closest to the crown. For Camilla, the balcony represented acceptance. For Anne, it represented service. For William, it represented the future. That difference mattered, because the argument was never truly about where someone stood. Every position carried a message, every entrance suggested rank, and every absence invited speculation. Behind the disagreement were decades of sacrifice, resentment, loyalty, and survival, and Charles suddenly found himself confronting a truth no palace document could soften. Each person believed they were protecting the monarchy. Anne had never measured duty by visibility. For decades, the Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had accepted exhausting schedules, difficult engagements, and endless obligations without demanding the most prominent place. That history shaped her reaction now. She did not object to hierarchy. She objected to hierarchy becoming flexible whenever one person wanted reassurance. To her, service had to come before display, or the institution itself would slowly lose its meaning. Camilla felt the opposite pressure. She had spent years fighting to reach a place where her position could no longer be treated as temporary or conditional. Now, as queen, she believed ceremonial authority mattered because symbols mattered. She told Charles privately that standing beside him, while still having her judgment questioned, left her exposed. The king listened without interrupting. He could hear the frustration beneath her words, and he knew this was not simply about balcony order. For her, it was about belonging. William sought out Anne later and asked the question directly. Had she truly rejected the proposal outright? She looked at him steadily. I rejected what it allows. The prince understood immediately. She was not asking him to choose sides against Camilla. She was warning him about precedent. Anne then pointed to the part that troubled her most. Catherine's placement could also be altered under the new arrangement. The Princess of Wales would remain prominent, but selected appearances could push her farther from Charles, depending on ceremonial decisions made elsewhere. William's expression changed. The future king understood the consequence at once. This was no longer about his aunt's position. It touched his wife, his children, and the public image of the next generation. Anne lowered her voice before telling him something else. Her concern had started weeks before the document ever appeared. During one closed rehearsal, she had watched a seemingly minor change unfold, one that everyone else accepted as routine. William asked what happened. Anne paused. Because the protocol had created the crisis, but it had not created the suspicion. And the moment she was about to describe was the exact point when everything changed. Anne had seen the warning before anyone else recognized it. Weeks before the protocol landed on the table, a closed balcony rehearsal had ended, with one instruction that seemed small enough to ignore. Catherine was asked to move. Anne was told to wait. Camilla remained exactly where she wanted to be. Nobody argued. Nobody raised their voice. But the Princess Royal remembered every second, because she understood that traditions rarely disappear in one dramatic stroke. They disappear through repetition. Anne had entered that rehearsal expecting nothing more than routine preparation. A balcony rehearsal is simply a private run-through, used to settle timing, entrances, positioning, and movement before a major public appearance. These sessions often involve small changes, and at first, she treated the adjustments that way. Then Camilla asked a ceremonial aide to move Catherine and the Wales children farther from the central doors. Moments later, Anne was told her own entrance would be delayed until after the Queen had taken position. Catherine complied without protest. The Princess of Wales moved where she was asked, keeping her reaction controlled and refusing to turn a practical instruction into a family disagreement. That restraint unsettled Anne more than resistance might have. She knew Catherine understood how quickly a minor objection could become a headline, especially when the public was already sensitive to questions of rank, succession, and the future of the monarchy. Camilla noticed Anne watching. The Queen asked whether something was wrong, and the answer came with deliberate calm. Anne said she was simply remembering the order everyone had originally been given, nothing more. Yet both women understood the meaning beneath those words. The Princess Royal was paying attention, and Camilla knew it. Anne initially allowed the matter to end there. Rehearsals changed, timings shifted. Senior royals sometimes moved because practical circumstances demanded it. But days later, the draft royal balcony appearance protocol arrived in her hands, and the details struck her immediately. Several of the adjustments presented as temporary during that rehearsal now appeared inside language that could give Camilla continuing influence over future appearances. That connection changed everything. Anne read the relevant passages again and thought back to Catherine stepping aside, the children being repositioned, and her own delayed entrance. What had looked like a harmless experiment now felt like a preview. If temporary discretion could become written authority once, it could happen again. Camilla learned soon afterward that Anne had connected the rehearsal to the new proposal. This time, she did not send another message through aides. She requested a private meeting, and the next exchange would contain no rehearsal marks, no polite distance, and nowhere for either woman to hide behind protocol. Camilla closed the door herself. That alone told Anne how serious the conversation had become. No ceremonial officials stood between them. No carefully written briefing could soften what either woman intended to say. The Queen wanted to know why a proposal concerning balcony organization had suddenly become a test of her judgment. Anne wanted to know why temporary decisions had become permanent authority. Within minutes, the polite language disappeared, and two very different ideas of royal duty collided face to face. Camilla spoke first. She argued that major balcony appearances needed a predictable structure because uncertainty over timing and placement created tension before events watched by millions. The Queen believed clearer authority would prevent last-minute disputes. Anne accepted the need for order, but she drew a hard distinction. The sovereign, the reigning monarch who holds final constitutional and ceremonial authority, could decide who appeared. No other individual royal, she insisted, should receive that same freedom. Camilla felt the criticism become personal. She reminded Anne that she had spent years being scrutinized, doubted, and measured against expectations she could never fully control. She had reached the position of queen after enduring that pressure, and she believed the new protocol simply recognized the reality of her place beside Charles. Anne listened without interrupting, but her expression did not soften. Camilla finally said what had been building beneath every previous exchange. "You're not rejecting the paper. You're rejecting me," Anne answered without raising her voice. "I'm rejecting the power inside it." The words cut deeper because they were so controlled. Anne acknowledged that Camilla had endured years of criticism, but she refused to accept that personal suffering justified changing long-standing boundaries around royal authority. The Princess Royal believed tradition could adapt, but it could not become a shield for insecurity. Camilla heard that clearly, and the room grew colder. Anne then revealed the decision that changed the confrontation entirely. She had already asked Charles to review the disputed clause himself. The king would now have to examine whether the queen should possess broad influence over balcony placement. Camilla understood immediately that the argument had escaped her control. Camilla asked one more question. Had William known before Anne objected? Anne told her no. The prince learned afterward. But once he discovered that Catherine and the children could be affected by shifting ceremonial decisions, he shared the concern. Camilla said nothing for several seconds. She understood what came next. Charles would have to choose. The confrontation ended without shouting, but the real battle had merely changed rooms, because only one person possessed the authority to decide whether Camilla's proposal survived. Charles read the disputed clause in silence. Then he read it again. Camilla had defended it. Anne had challenged it. William had questioned its consequences. Now every argument had arrived at the same desk, and the king could no longer allow anyone else to absorb the pressure. A signature would strengthen his wife's ceremonial hand. A rejection would wound her deeply. But doing nothing carried its own message. And when Charles finally placed his pen beside the document, he still had not signed. Charles understood where the final responsibility rested. The sovereign, the reigning monarch with ultimate authority over formal royal appearances, could approve who represented the crown, while household officials handled practical details such as timing, entrances, and positioning. Camilla could propose a new structure, but the queen could not make that structure binding on her own. The ceremonial team therefore placed three choices before the king: approve the protocol unchanged, remove the disputed powers, or send the entire document back for revision. Charles hated what each option threatened to cost. He knew why Camilla wanted certainty. She had spent years enduring criticism before finally reaching a position she believed should carry unmistakable recognition. But he knew Anne just as well. His sister had rarely challenged him over ceremony for the sake of personal status. When she pushed this hard, it usually meant she believed something larger was at risk. William chose his words carefully when Charles asked for his view. The prince refused to turn the discussion into an attack on Camilla. He understood her role and respected the need for clear planning. But Catherine and the children, he said, could not become pieces that moved whenever family tensions changed. Their positions carried meaning because they represented the monarchy's future, not because anyone wanted extra prominence. Charles returned to the clause. One weakness suddenly became impossible to ignore. The wording gave Camilla broad discretion over positioning, but never clearly defined where that discretion ended. What sounded efficient today could become precedent tomorrow. Another queen might use it differently. Another family dispute might turn it into a weapon. Charles realized Anne had challenged more than a person. She had challenged an undefined power. The king picked up his pen. He did not sign. Charles drew a firm mark beside the controversial paragraph and wrote one word: rewrite. That single instruction froze the new protocol immediately. Camilla would receive the altered draft before anyone else, and when she saw what Charles had removed, the queen would have to decide whether his action was a compromise or a betrayal. The king had not rejected his wife, but by refusing her wording, he had removed the very authority she believed the document was meant to secure. Camilla knew what had happened before she reached the final page. Whole sentences remained untouched, but the paragraph that mattered had been dismantled. The authority she had expected was gone. Her role remained. Her title remained. Her place beside Charles remained. Yet the power to determine how others joined them had vanished completely. She finished reading, folded the paper once, and asked the room to be cleared. For the first time since the dispute began, she had nothing left to argue. Camilla returned to the revised royal balcony appearance protocol and read the new wording carefully. The protocol, the formal set of rules controlling entrances, positions, and participation during major balcony appearances, now placed final decisions with Charles. supported by the ceremonial household. The queen could still advise him, but she could no longer decide independently where another senior royal stood, or whether that person appeared at all. Camilla felt the loss more deeply than she expected. It was not simply the removal of a clause. Charles had accepted the central concern raised by Anne, and that knowledge carried its own humiliation. The queen had wanted certainty after years of questioning her place. Instead, she now felt that her judgment had been challenged by the very family whose acceptance mattered most. Charles entered later and immediately understood her silence. The king told her he had not chosen his sister over his wife. He had chosen a rule that needed to survive every personality, every marriage, and every future reign. Camilla looked at him and answered quietly that such distinctions sounded reasonable until your own name became attached to the defeat. Anne received the revised wording separately and found something she had never demanded. Charles had inserted a safeguard stating that no consort, heir, sibling, or other individual royal could independently exclude another senior family member from a major balcony appearance. The Princess Royal read that sentence twice. Her brother had taken one objection and turned it into a permanent boundary. Anne also understood what that meant for William. The prince would eventually inherit enormous authority, yet even the future king's household would have to respect the same principle when dealing with a consort or other relatives. William would not inherit a loophole merely because Anne had challenged Camilla first. Anne felt no triumph. She asked for a private conversation with Charles. Camilla had lost the clause, but Anne knew the argument could still leave a deeper wound unless brother and sister finally spoke without anyone else in the room. Anne did not come to apologize. Charles knew that before she spoke. But she had not come to celebrate either. With no aides, no Camilla, and no William between them, brother and sister finally confronted what the argument had cost. Charles asked whether Anne understood how personally his wife had taken the rejection. She said she did. Then he asked the harder question, would she make the same decision again? Anne looked at him for a long moment before answering yes. Anne chose her words carefully. Royal protocol, the formal rules that determine how members of the monarchy behave, appear, and take precedence during official occasions, had to survive the people currently living under it. She told Charles that once personal preference became permanent institutional language, future generations could inherit powers nobody had intended to create. The Princess Royal was not frightened by Camilla herself. She was frightened by the precedent. Charles understood the distinction, but he refused to pretend there had been no personal damage. He told Anne that whatever her intention, the queen had felt singled out and publicly weakened inside her own family. The king had spent years watching his wife fight for acceptance. Every time he protected her, critics accused him of bending tradition. Every time he defended tradition, Camilla feared that her place beside him was still conditional. Anne lowered her voice. That consequence troubled her more than she had admitted. She had never wanted to humiliate Camilla, and she took no satisfaction from seeing her hurt. But the Princess Royal could not accept a rule simply because rejecting it would cause pain. Protecting feelings, she told her brother, could not become more important than protecting boundaries around the crown. Anne then returned to the moment that had changed her thinking completely. During that private rehearsal, Catherine had been moved without complaint. She had simply accepted the instruction and carried on. To Anne, that silence mattered. The Princess of Wales was avoiding confrontation, but repeated accommodation could eventually become expectation. Someone had to object before a temporary arrangement hardened into tradition. Charles listened, then gave his sister the answer she had not expected. The rewritten rule would be universal. The king explained that it would apply during William's future reign as well. No royal consort would ever receive unilateral authority to determine who appeared on the balcony or where another senior family member stood. Anne finally understood how far her brother had gone. He had not merely settled their dispute, he had closed the loophole permanently. But the silence surrounding that decision was already breaking. Within hours, the argument would escape private rooms and reach the palace gates, where Camilla, Anne, Catherine, and the very meaning of royal rank would be judged in public. By morning, the argument no longer belonged to the family. The words balcony protocol were suddenly everywhere. But the public understood the story in simpler terms. Camilla had wanted greater control, and Anne had said no. Supporters saw courage. Critics saw insubordination. Others saw another painful reminder that royal titles cannot erase complicated history. Yet one moment outside Buckingham Palace captured the mood more powerfully than any headline, and it happened when Anne's car approached the gates. Charles watched the dispute become something he had feared from the beginning, a public test of loyalty. The rewritten balcony policy, a formal set of rules governing which senior royals appear with the sovereign and how their positions are arranged, was now being discussed as though it represented a personal battle between two women. Broadcasters explained that Anne had rejected the original proposal and that the king had ordered its most controversial powers removed. Within hours, the palace disagreement became a national argument about who should control the monarchy's most symbolic public appearances. Camilla followed the coverage with growing frustration. The Queen heard commentators describe her proposal as a struggle for prominence, while others defended her by arguing that her position beside Charles should carry meaningful ceremonial influence. She had viewed the original plan as a way to create certainty. Now that motive had almost disappeared beneath accusations of ambition. For Camilla, the humiliation was not simply losing the clause. It was watching strangers define why she had wanted it. Anne reacted very differently. The Princess Royal was urged to explain herself publicly, but she refused to turn the moment into a victory speech. Through the royal household, she made her position simple. Charles had made the final decision, and that decision should speak for itself. She would not attack Camilla, nor would she apologize for challenging the proposal. Then the public produced its own symbol. Anne's vehicle approached Buckingham Palace, and a small crowd gathered near the gates suddenly began applauding. One person raised a handwritten sign above the others. It carried only 3 words: duty before position. The phrase spread rapidly through coverage of the dispute, transforming one brief reaction into the image people associated with her refusal. William immediately understood the danger. The prince supported Charles's decision, but he worried that celebrating Anne as a winner would automatically cast Camilla as the defeated enemy. He wanted Catherine and the children protected from shifting ceremonial preferences. Yet he refused to let that principle become justification for humiliating the Queen. Charles now faced one final responsibility. The applause outside the gates could crown a winner, but the king knew the monarchy could not survive if this ended with one woman victorious and another defeated. He still had to sign the final protocol and make its meaning unmistakable. The final document looked almost identical to the one that had started the crisis. That was the irony. The margins were clean, the language was restrained. No accusation appeared anywhere on the page. Yet one principle had changed completely. Nobody standing beside the sovereign could control the balcony for personal advantage. Not Camilla, not Anne, not William, and not any future consort. Charles signed beneath the revised wording, closed the folder, and ended an argument that had threatened to become something far more damaging. Charles had finally settled the question at the heart of the dispute: the royal balcony appearance protocol, the formal set of rules governing who joins the monarch, how senior royals enter, and where they are positioned now, left ultimate authority with the king, while ceremonial officials handled practical arrangements. No individual royal could independently exclude, move, or diminish another senior family member. The decision was clear, permanent, and deliberately larger than the personalities involved. Anne accepted the signed document without asking for praise. The Princess Royal gained no special protection, no greater position, and no personal advantage from the restrictions she had demanded. The same limits applied to her. That mattered because her rejection could no longer be dismissed as a fight for prominence. She had challenged a power she was equally willing to surrender herself. Camilla understood the verdict immediately. The Queen remained beside Charles. Her title was untouched, her dignity remained intact, and her place within the monarchy had not been removed. But the institution would not reshape its rules simply to reassure her of that position. Charles acknowledged privately that the battle had hurt his wife, yet he also admitted that Anne had forced him to confront a weakness he might otherwise have ignored. His decision was not punishment, it was protection. William saw an even deeper consequence. The prince understood that the restriction would one day apply during his own reign. Anne had not merely stopped Camilla from gaining control over one balcony, she had helped establish a boundary capable of restraining future heirs, future consorts, and future family tensions long after this argument was forgotten. Anne and Camilla met again at the next formal family gathering. The Princess Royal offered a restrained greeting. The Queen returned it. Neither apologized, neither demanded surrender. Yet both followed the same agreed order, and that quiet compliance said more than another confrontation ever could. The dispute ended with no exile, no humiliation, and no triumphant winner. Anne had challenged an idea without trying to destroy the woman behind it. Camilla kept her place. Charles reclaimed the responsibility that belonged to the sovereign. And the monarchy learned that genuine authority requires limits, even when those limits hurt. The balcony remained only a balcony, but everyone now understood what it represented. Rank may determine where you stand, but duty determines whether the crown itself remains standing. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.